Hello everyone, this is Ian Schaefer here with UDA Technologies, and we are just about ready to dive into our tips and tricks estimating webinar. Today we're going to be going over a few finer points in the estimating system that we offer in ConstructionSuite, and we're going to take you through some of these relatively unused tricks, or some of the unknown tricks. Some of you guys have hopefully worked with these in the past, some of you haven't had the chance yet, but we're going to show off a lot of them so that you guys have an advantage over some of your competitors. So once again, my name is Ian Schaefer. I'm here as one of the senior product specialists for UDA Technologies. I also have my colleague, Jordan Davis. Jordan has been here for a while as well. Jordan, how long have you been working with ConstructionSuite and ConstructionOnline now?
Yeah, at this point, Ian, it's been a little over a year and a half, and it's been a fantastic experience so far. I've gotten to know a lot of our clients that have been with us for a very long time. I've also had the fantastic opportunity to get to know a lot of our incoming new clients as a member of our sales team here. It's been a fantastic year and a half, and really looking forward to sharing some insights from across the industry and really across the globe at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And along those lines too, just to give you guys an idea of where we're coming from with ConstructionSuite, this is the ConstructionSuite platform. Of course, UDA Technologies, we've been around for about 20 years, and ConstructionSuite was actually first released in 2006. So this is, what does that make us, like a 12-year program at this point?
Yeah, definitely a mature product. It's grown and grown from that point for sure.
Yeah, and this is one of the many tools that we offer that caters to a little over 500,000 clients that we have, or 500,000 users across over, at this point, well over 75 countries. I think we're into the 80s at this point. But again, this is all going to be information for the desktop set of tools that we're looking at today. The estimating platform that we're working with is in ConstructionSuite, and it's a platform called OnCost. OnCost is our built-in ConstructionSuite estimating tool. Each of the projects will have one or many estimates that we can take a look at today, and we're also going to be taking a look at the templates and some of the built-in features and functions available to just about all of us working with the ConstructionSuite platform. Now again, as I mentioned, all of our focus is going to be here. We will be building on some of the fundamentals that we talked about in our last webinar, the first in this series of tips and tricks, where we were talking about creating some of the project templates and designing workflows and processes to help us succeed when we're repeating these processes as we move forward. So our goal today is to talk about how to set up our estimates so that they help us, once again, save time and build on the successes that we've implemented in the past, hopefully refining those successes as well so that every project is better than the last. Now along those lines, we'll go ahead and dive in with this, just to give you guys an idea as well. You may notice that there's a lot of Windows icons here. The computer that we're actually using for the webinar today is one of our cloud-hosted solutions available with our partnership with Amazon. So this is actually an Amazon-hosted server that we're working off of today. We can minimize it and move it around a little bit. You can see that it's all kind of built into the cloud, so this computer that we're using could be accessed anywhere in the world. Now I like to take this approach as we're going through the webinar itself because I'd like everybody to see what kind of offers or opportunities you guys have for travel. I find that these kind of hosted servers are exceptional for anybody who wants to broaden their work area, perhaps, if they're going to start building in multiple towns or anything like this. This allows you to work on the move. It also enables you to use outside resources a little bit more regularly. A lot of us have QuickBooks Pro advisors that we might consult with. We can share these with some of our QuickBooks Pro advisors. Of course, we have several in-house, like the two of us here. But as we kind of build on some of these tools and resources, I'd just like you guys to keep in mind that all of this information that we're looking at today is cloud hosted, which also means that you guys can decentralize your offices a little bit and save yourselves some trips if you guys are interested in taking a look at something like this. Now, as we get into the estimating part itself, though, all of this information is going to be found in one of two places in the ConstructionSuite interface. So from the main dashboard, when you first log into ConstructionSuite, you'll have over on the left-hand side your estimating feature set, which is where we can find a dashboard for all of the estimate tools, like our classification breakdown and costs, our change order summary, and some of the recent estimates that we've been working on here. You'll also find estimate templates and custom templates here as well, and an area where we can work in the items database. This is where you'll find any of your own custom cost books, RS means cost books, and you'll see a lot of the pricing information available for you guys in the estimates themselves. Now, the second place that you'll find most of those estimates, of course, is going to be within the projects or potentially opportunities for those of you guys using the Premier or Catalyst versions of ConstructionSuite and above. And within each of these projects, you'll see a list of recent files, which is where you can find the estimates themselves. Now, again, each of these projects that we're looking at has base estimate values in here, so this is one of the ways that we know that some of the estimate pricing information is already coming through. Some of it is coming from QuickBooks as well, like the committed costs and the invoiced amounts, but this is a webinar for another time. So we're just going to focus on the estimates themselves, and when we go into these projects, you'll actually find the estimates both over on the right-hand side. The icon for this, as you can see here, is the little green file icon. But you'll also be able to get into your primary estimate by clicking on this link right here in the middle. Under Project Details, there's a place to view Primary Estimate. This is especially beneficial for any of you guys who are using any kind of file versioning system in your offices. You may have one original estimate that you guys quoted for the job. After some negotiations, maybe we've got 2 or 3 newer copies. One of them has to be the primary. You can tell because it's got a dot on the file icon itself. But more importantly, if you don't want to go find it through the list, you can just click on this link and it will launch your primary estimate for any given job. Now, as you're looking through these estimates, they pretty much all look something like this. This is on cost, and this is one of the estimates that we have open for one of our residential projects. Now, within the estimating system that we're looking at, of course, you've got the main dashboard, the project totals page, which gives you a summary of everything. Now, from this summary, of course, we have all the different columns that we've got open over here on the left-hand side. Down at the bottom, you can see the tabs for each of the primary category sheets that we're working on. Up at the top, you've got an additional navigation tool here to sift through. What a lot of you guys may not know is that there's an estimate summary section over here as well that can be expanded or collapsed. And the estimate summary has a little space on here where you can link into the various different categories, subcategories, or classifications, or later on maybe even change orders. When you click on the link, it takes you to the first qualifying piece to follow that. For the category totals, for example, if we click on HVAC, this takes us into HVAC. If we decide to go up to and try to find the change order here for the additional fireplace, when you click on this, it takes you to the next piece of that change order, and so on through. So there's a lot of hyperlinks here in the estimate summary section that allow us to navigate more readily, and all of that's going to be, again, built into the little right sidebar that you've got in there. Now, most of the tools that we're looking at are actually going to be within the body of the estimate, so in the numbers that we're working with here. And the first of these is going to be the classification markup function available that takes advantage of some of the classifications that we built into ConstructionSuite's estimates line by line. Oh, let's turn off that phone. Now, as you're working your way through this, of course, you can always turn on some additional columns, features, or functions, and there's a couple of different ways to do this, of course. We've got some quick access views down here in the bottom right hand corner where you can go into and set something like an organizational view, where you could turn on perhaps everything if you guys wanted the advanced view down here. You could turn on all the different columns and all the different details and everything like that that you guys may need in there. From the view menu, you can actually further refine this using the show hide columns option, or you can get to this just by right clicking on any of the column headers to show or hide columns here as well. I'm going to go back to the standard view for our predefined set, because this just gives us a simplified view for what we're looking at. But I also want to pinpoint, before we go too far beyond this, that all of these columns are adjustable as well. So what you guys may not have recognized yet is if there is one piece that you wanted to grab and move to the forefront, all you need to do is highlight that row or column and just drag them around to rearrange all of your columns and everything that you guys are working with. This is a file-specific function, but if you guys are working with a couple of people and you've got some of the columns that need to be brought out to the front, you can do that. You can just drag them, drop them to the front of the list, and now it's always going to be in the order that you want. This is a huge advancement that we implemented, I want to say a couple of versions ago, because we made the shift back in 2013, I want to say, from an Excel-based estimating to on-cost itself. And when we made that shift, we realized that we can actually do a lot of things that you can't do in Excel. And this is an easy one. Just rearranging things, grouping, and customizing these views a little bit to give you a little bit more than you might have worked with in the past. Now again, we were getting into classification markups. So in here, we have a classification column. And in this column, you will find the core 5 classifications. Now those 5 classifications, of course, are going to be your standard set. We're looking at material costs, labor costs, subcontractors, equipment, and other costs. And as you're working with these, of course, you can go through and assign what type of item we're doing per line. And you can, as you saw me do just there, if you select one for the top item in the row, it actually applies throughout the rest, but then we can always go in and change these out one by one as needed as well. Now again, most of this information is going to be available in the body of the estimate itself, but Jordan, why don't you tell us really quickly how this classification markup has any tie-in to the markups themselves? Like in this case, as we go through and we make these changes in the classification column, how can we make that change give us, let's say, a 10% added cost for our material? Or can we do things like account for labor burden with a markup on all of our labor items?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have built-in classification markups that you can access by navigating up to the estimating menu up here at the top and moving into the menu to set classification markups. Now this is a really, really great tool to build in some efficiency into your estimating workflow here. You can actually go in and tie default classification markups to the classifications that we were just looking at. So in the example that you just brought up, Ian, if we did want to add in some type of percent to take into account burdened labor, we can do that right here in this menu.
Absolutely. And like he mentioned, this is going to help us account for all of these things without having to worry about going into and manually adding in all these additional costs. Now, if we're going through and building in an estimate accurately, one of the first things that you have to do, especially for things like labor, is go into and put in the expected cost without any fudging of numbers. And what I mean by that is if you pay your guy $25 an hour, the unit cost should be $25 per unit, the quantity should be the number of hours, and the unit itself should obviously be per man hour. Now from there, we will need to turn on to view some of the additional columns to get that markup in there to cover some of these additional expenses in having employees. And that might be just about anything. It could be the uniform expenses, it could be again, vacation time or sick leave or workman's comp or liability, cell phones perhaps, or travel. All of that gets built in. All of that becomes part of this as well, and it's all accounted for by default. We don't have to remember to go in there and do all of these things. It's just using those classification markups. So that's a huge piece of it, and making sure that you have these things in there as well is going to tie into some of these additional details. Now, one thing that you mentioned to me before we started as well was another option in there for adjusting default settings. So, and I believe in this case it actually had something to do with not only subcategory defaults, but again some of the default options that we have for classifications and taxes and things like that as well. Now these, by the way, that Jordan had wanted me to point out for you guys as well, can be found under the Tools menu in Options. And from here, you have the ability to go into and create a uniformity for these subcategories that we're building into the system. If all of our labor items are showing up in the same subcategory, then we can set it by default to use the same classification for each of the items in a subcategory. Again, this allows us to change one value and have all of them change the same way that you guys saw it earlier. We can, of course, as we did before, go in and change individuals, but this allows us to create that uniform classification or uniform taxes or units or anything like that, which is really handy when we start to have very large subcategories with 10, 15, 20, maybe 100 line items, because then using these options, you change one setting and it affects all of them together instead of having to go in and click in that drop down 10, 15, 20, 100 times.
Exactly, and I think that taking a look at some of the, I wouldn't really call them tucked away or hidden because they're right there in the options menu, but taking a look at some of the often overlooked items inside of OnCost, this being a prime example, I think could really cut down on the amount of time that it takes for you to put together more accurate estimates and really help you get out more proposals. Now, you'll also notice in this menu that since efficiency is the name of the game, there are a few other options that we can drill into. For instance, that markup, classification markups that we were just looking at, is accessible from the options menu as well. That way you don't have to keep moving back around to get to different parts of your options in your estimate. Something that you were just mentioning, Ian, was the subcategory defaults. If you and your company is a company that tends to subcontract out a lot of the work that you're doing, perhaps you come in here and you edit the default settings for your estimate and change the classification to default to subcontractor classifications for the different items that you're putting into the estimate. Those little gains in efficiency really start to add up over time. And when you are building out a system to get to the point where you can handle and take on more volume, these pieces begin to multiply how much efficiency you can expect out of a system like ConstructionOnline or ConstructionSuite's estimating tools.
Absolutely. And this, by the way, these subcategory defaults come into play whenever you're creating a new subcategory within this estimate. Of course, there's an option here at the bottom to make this apply to all estimates that you work on. This is basically going to adjust all of OnCost. But for this estimate in particular, as Jordan mentioned, we might be putting together a number of bids. So since it's a subcategory that I'm putting in as a bid, it's going to be a lump sum. So I want all of my new subcategories to get added as a lump sum. The classification, again, is going to be subcontractor. We might go into the unit and say each or per bid or something along these lines. But again, when we set these values here, they now apply whenever we come into and click into the Add New Subcategory field here. All of those settings will be applied by default, so we don't have to go in there and set them every time. Again, little time savers that create huge time savings when we apply this every time. Now, along those lines, I mentioned earlier that I'm one of the QuickBooks Pro advisors, so there is a feature in here that actually stops people from doing what I just described so that we don't end up with new subcategories every time, which would then in turn create new items every time in QuickBooks when you integrate. Now, the options to do this are also very, very new, and you can find them down here under Lock Estimate. Now, in this Lock section, you can actually set up your estimate after you go in and put together some of your maybe default category and subcategory names. You can set it so that it locks those columns down so that new users don't come in and make changes to the names or customize things. You can also do things like come into this locking space and lock the notes and descriptions, or perhaps lock down the quantities and dimensions and costs so that we can fix this in contract so that this information doesn't change after we get all of this information in place. You could also go into and lock down some of your taxes and markups as well so that we don't accidentally go in and change those values to something else, thinking that we might be working in a different style of estimate perhaps. So again, you have a lot of locking mechanisms in here, and what this does is it allows you to shut down certain areas of the estimate so we don't accidentally change values or results while working through trying to create some of the reports and the tools that we work with from there. Now, this, again, is a huge benefit as we're working with things like QuickBooks integration because it allows us to keep a consistent set of items, what QuickBooks would refer to as the items list, by locking down something like the name column. There was a question in here about generating some of the reports for one of the work that, or some of the work that we do, and I think the question specifically refers to things like allowances or options or something along those lines. If you were to lock down the types and the structure, you can set it up so that you're using the same terms for all of these allowances every time, so that when you generate a proposal and have a section for your allowances at the top, you always know what to expect as you go through that and work through these values. So again, having these locks in place or using this locking function allows you to go through and find what needs to be held and hand off the estimate to somebody who's maybe a little bit less experienced without being concerned about them going in there and screwing up all of the names for the items or forcing us to have to roll back our estimate to an earlier version. Again, if we're doing the estimate versioning thing, that would come into play. But again, huge savings here, not just in making sure that nobody goes in there and again, customizes too much, but it also gives us the comfort of knowing that if we don't lock it down or if we don't have to permission lock the file, then we can actually hand it off without them screwing up various different specific parts.
Yeah, it really is a useful tool. I can't tell you, I feel like I've been working with a good number of clients over the past few weeks to talk about setting up the QuickBooks integration from the start, making sure that they have the integration set, that they have their item code set the way that they want it to be, and that it maintains a consistency from project to project. So obviously that's going to start with an estimate template, but some of the concerns that I continually hear are, well, if everything centers around the name of the items, well, those can't change. And then the answer to that, of course, is, well, now you have a tool to make sure that that is true. The item names can't change.
That's absolutely correct. And as you're going through, you can also apply some additional adjustments, not just to your estimate templates, but also locking that information down as you build that template. Most of that information can be fixed or set here in the estimate itself. You can go through and apply things like allowances if you'd like, or you can set options. Change orders don't really come into play for templates very often, estimate templates, so hopefully those aren't going to be a part of this. But as you work through this, you can apply those types, you can apply those category names and subcategory names and lock down whatever you might need locked. All of this will remain when you come up to the File menu and Save as Template. This allows you to take all of this information that was really useful to us this time and actually build it back into a template. Now, the added bonus for using this option, by the way, in the Save as Template section, when you come to take this and turn it into an estimating template of some kind, it gives you the ability to go through and remove some of the potentially job-specific values. Those, of course, are going to be things like QuickBooks information. If you've imported actual costs and invoiced amounts and committed costs, those would be job-specific values that you may not need to see every single time, so you can come through and remove those when you save it as a template. You can also do things like remove some of your costs, quantities, or resources, just in case you wanted to have an empty estimate when you save it back in there as a template to use on future jobs. For me personally, I prefer to use some of the information here, like quantities and costs, so that we can make small adjustments. But if the estimate itself turned out well for the type of job that we're working on, and we want to template most of what worked, let's leave some of these fields here and just clear out some of the, again, QuickBooks actuals and invoiced amounts and things like that, since we want to start that aspect clean when we move on. Now, one of the interesting things that I don't hear very often discussed, so I'll share with you guys today, is the ability to create a cost book from an estimate. Now, for those of you guys who have been using ConstructionSuite in the past, you'll probably know that there's going to be options in here, either through the right-click menu to insert from the items database, or using the items database feature over here on the right-hand side, where you can open up and work within various different cost books, if you have some. And it allows you to go through and pull items from something like RS Means and apply them in one of your projects here in ConstructionSuite. Usually that's the order you will find it. You will find that the estimate will need to be created, and then you go into your cost book and grab items that you guys may want to use from that estimate or from the cost book and put them into the estimate itself. I would argue that finding the right set of prices, especially for people who are working the same floor plans or models for homes, finding those right prices and applying them to a cost book is also incredibly valuable. When you go into the items database space itself, you'll have an option in here to create your cost book using the estimate itself. Now, again, it kind of works a little bit in reverse, but when you import all your items from your estimate, it's actually going to go through and pull the items with the same structure as you see it in the estimate itself, and it's going to pull all of this information into a brand new cost book, filling out all of those item costs as you go. As you can see, I can go through and actually choose which fields I want to have, so again, the change order might not be included. Maybe we go through and select some of the other areas as well so that we can get some consistent pricing information in here, making sure that everything looks good as we pull it in. But as we actually come into and work with these costs coming into a cost book, it allows us to not only create this brand new cost book that has some pricing information that worked the last time we did this floor plan, but it also gives us a single place to update the costs. So if we're building a subdivision and we have 15 or 20 different homes and we realize that the cost has increased for one of these, we can actually just come in here, update this one cost, and then back in the estimate itself, there's actually a button under the estimating tab to refresh all these prices to match. Again, 10, 15 estimates that are all built off of the same template, with one place to update the costs for all of them, means that now you can do 15 things in one button click. So again, update these prices, get the information put together, and you guys can save, again, a ton of additional time. Now from that cost book, by the way, you can always access it both in the estimate itself, or if you guys remember, back in the main interface, when we go back to the estimating tab, you'll find not only all the custom templates that you're creating here, but any cost books that might be included as well under the items database. From here you can go through and select this new cost book that has some of those items. You'll find the items, their costs, the units associated with them, and all of the additional detail that might have come in from the estimate itself. So again, looking through, you'll find the same structure, which means anybody going in there and updating the prices can go into and work with that as well. And you guys can pull in some of those details as you work your way through. Now, one thing that I do hear regularly, by the way, before we go back in and start touching on some of these questions, you'll find that all of my estimate templates are very extensive. I am a firm believer in having everything that we need in the template so that we don't have to add anything as we go. I know that we actually have some QuickBooks users here, or going back up to the top, it does look like we've got bookkeepers and pro advisors and an accountant or three. But again, in this case, we want to use that items list, that collection of items that doesn't change. So everything needs to be in the estimate itself. Now, if everything is in the estimate itself, that means that we need a way to easily remove anything that didn't get used on this specific job. Now, with any given estimate that you're working on, you'll find areas where you have $0 items. Maybe these are going to be miscellaneous sections that we might have used, or maybe we didn't. There could be an entire category or subcategory that did or did not get used, again, as we go. And when those happen, rather than going through and deleting each individual one, which can be time consuming, again, you would have to go through and right click and delete the row to remove a single item, or right click and delete a subcategory if we didn't use anything in this entire subcategory here for masonry, fireplace, labor. We could delete the entire subcategory if we chose to. But instead of doing that, we can actually go back to the main listing. Under the View menu, there's a button that not very many people know about to hide all the unused sections. It literally does that. Anything that has a 0 price will get hidden when you click the option, and it doesn't apply those items to reports. It's not going to send those items over to QuickBooks. It's not going to use them for anything. It just kind of brushes them under the rug until maybe later when we do need them. Now, the reason that I'm a huge advocate for doing this, hiding those unused sections, is because eventually we may come up with change orders. And when those change orders come up, if the scope for the project changes, and now we're going to be installing a back patio perhaps, this might involve some additional work that we didn't have as part of the estimate originally, but the sections here for that area would already be built into the estimate, so all we have to do now is right-click on them and turn them into a change order from here. Now again, this is going to be a big time saver because we don't have to go in there and try to match up the names. We don't have to go in and try to adjust all the codes or the costs or anything like that. We're just going to go in and use the pieces that are already here, but maybe didn't get applied in the beginning. So keeping them as part of your estimate template and having a more expansive template saves us a ton of time in the long run because it's all going to be there when we're ready for those change orders. Now along those lines too, since I'm talking about change orders, and of course QuickBooks has a little spin on this too, another quick little trick that you guys will find as you're working through the integration is, well, I guess we can talk about the downside first. In QuickBooks, everything is going to be alphanumerically sorted in the items list. Everything. Now this means when you send over this list of subcategories, again, if we go over to the right sidebar and take a look at the totals by category, you'll notice that my estimate starts with planning, and then foundation and framing, exterior windows and doors, electrical, and so on. There's no alphabetical sense to this, but we looking at it know that it makes complete sense because you start by planning your job, and then you've got to pour the foundation, and then you start doing the framing, and so on. So logically, it makes complete sense. Alphabetically, it makes 0 sense. QuickBooks likes alphabetically. Now, if we're going to be working with this, it is an alphabetical and a numeric sort. So here's a little trick for those of you guys who are working with QuickBooks. If you want the QuickBooks items list to match your ConstructionSuite estimate category order, all you have to do is put a little 2-digit number out in front of each of your categories. So as we're going through, instead of planning, it becomes 01 planning. Instead of foundation, it becomes 02 foundation. And the 2-digit category, by the way, is important because QuickBooks treats everything as a word, not as a number. So we need 01 instead of just 1, and 02 instead of just 2, because I've got more than 10 categories in my list. It becomes important because eventually we'll go from 01, 02, 03 to 09, 10, 11, and so on. QuickBooks looks at all of this and says, okay, 1, then 10, then 11, then 2, then maybe 20, and 21, and so on. So again, rather than dealing with that stress, 2-digit numbers are good. If you guys have more than 90 categories, maybe do 3 digits instead, or 4. I know if you guys are using any of the templates that we've built into the system for something like a 16 division or a 50 division cost code, sometimes those numbers get up into the, I've seen them get as big as 8 digits long, because it'll be maybe 2 digits for your category, and then 4 digits for your subcategory, and then maybe another 2 to 4 digits for your item as well. Part of the coding structure that happens in some of those templates will sometimes get pretty extensive. So all of this comes into play when you're looking through QuickBooks, or any other accounting system for that matter. So again, handy little things to note, especially if you guys are working with something like the G702 and G703 application for payment forms, which you can generate here in ConstructionSuite if you have the corporate or Catalyst versions of ConstructionSuite and above. It is part of the QuickBooks integration feature set, and as you're working through this, you guys can actually take advantage of some of those numbering schemes to get the same order here or through the proposal as you guys will get on the continuation sheet or G703 when you generate that after pay as well. Let's see.
Yeah, well, Ian, I think you were going in a really interesting direction there. I think this was not even 2 days ago. I was having a conversation with one of our current clients, and they were actually asking how they could adjust some of the structure of their estimate to make sure that their change orders ended up at the end of the list instead of mixing into their continuation sheet, as you were saying, in that alphabetical order. So following along the logical order of operations here, it makes a lot of sense to just add in perhaps a section at the end of the estimate, add in another category, and make sure that it fits in with the alphanumeric numbering structure here, and use that section to build out your change orders.
There tends to be a lot of applications in here. It actually looks like I'm going through some of the questions that we've got, and it looks like there's some additional questions that kind of build on what you were just talking about there, Jordan. And getting caught up on some of these, Sydney has done a spectacular job of keeping ahead of them, but she's flagged a few of them for us to touch on. And since this is most of our tricks, the last trick that I'm going to leave you with today actually kind of ties into one of the questions that we've got here from one of our viewers. There's a question here about, again, going back to the allowances. Can you show how to use allowances and have the individual items show on the proposal? It seems to only have the roll-up for allowances and the totals that apply there when we're providing that for our clients. And it's an interesting observation from somebody who's obviously been using ConstructionSuite for a while, or at least I'm making that assumption here. The report that's being referenced, of course, is going to be the proposal found in the proposal wizard itself. Now, the proposal wizard has a number of different options and different settings and everything like that might apply. As you go through and you take a look at the proposal wizard, you'll find 2 spaces where the allowances can be included. So this is a residential job, so we're going to go through and use one of the residential proposal templates. And as we sift our way through the information available within the proposal itself, the first area that applies is here. On this page in the proposal wizard, you'll have an area where you can include standard allowances as a separate section. Now what this is going to do is it's going to actually take all of our allowance subcategories. Again, the type here in the estimate itself can be assigned as allowance, which means that we're budgeting some amount that our customers are going to spend instead of us. Now when we include those allowance sections, it's going to pull all those subcategories out and say that we've budgeted allowances for things like, as is mentioned here, maybe light fixtures, or plumbing fixtures, or countertops or whatever it might be. We're going to let them go do the shopping for it. A fridge is another good example. Kitchen appliances is going to be in there too. It may not itemize. In fact, in this particular section, I know it won't itemize. We're giving them a lump sum for a budget for that group of selections that need to be made. So this section is just going to pull out the high level of detail. As you go over to the next page, you can pull some of the additional information here into the body, the real meat of the proposal itself, where you can make adjustments to the itemization that's available by doing things like, I want to include everything, I want to prorate my company overhead margin because I'm not that open book. I want that company overhead margin value, the dollar amount, to be spread proportionally throughout. But I don't want to mark it up into the allowances. I want those allowances to be separated. It's a hard word today. But I do want to itemize. In this case, the body of the proposal will include not only those subcategories that are going to be mentioned in the top portion, but it's also going to give us an itemized breakdown without prorated costs, so the customer will see exactly how much we've budgeted for the allowance. If I set aside $4,000 for a fridge because my customer seems like the kind of person that might want an iPad built into their screen, whatever the smart fridge.
Yeah, I think that it shows a video display of what's in the fridge, so you don't have to open the door.
While it sounds fun, not normally the kind of thing that I would think about, but if my customer might want that, we'd have that budgeted in the allowance section. So again, itemizing here allows us to get that. But it also means that everything else in the proposal is going to be itemized as well, which almost defeats the purpose of us being involved. So you can do two things instead. The proposal might be simplified, and in the proposal itself, you'll include that section for allowances. When we get to the meat of the proposal, let's not check the box to include the items. I want to keep it simple. From here, we might actually edit the proposal template. There's actually a section back a little bit earlier where you can edit your templates. But when you generate this proposal, we might include a complete allowance report for the customer, which might be itemized. Now, this allowance report is going to include a lot of additional detail that I don't want to show in the proposal because I don't want to accidentally include too much information in the proposal, but I do need them to see it. So adding an allowance report gives them a breakdown with the budget amounts, while the proposal gives them a breakdown of the costs by major headings. And I'm not overloading them with information, I'm just providing the additional detail where appropriate. So this combination of reports is a really, really good one because now you can kind of customize the presentation by just generating a few additional reports. Now, to add to this, where the trick comes into play, I've been working with somebody recently. He runs a larger, I'm not going to tell you what type of company it is because it might be a dead giveaway if I do. But there's a lot of very specific things in various different places that he wants to tie together. And an easy way that we found to do this was actually using a different report under project management for an item units report. Now, the item units report is a very, very interesting one because what it does is it allows you to go through and grab everything with a specific unit applied, like maybe everything that's set to per man hour, so we could pull out all of our labor that we expect to have, all the man-hour rates and everything like that. Or maybe if we're doing flooring and we're going to be doing carpeted areas, maybe we're going to be pulling it out per roll or something like that. He created a number of very specific, unique item units that are applied to these very specific, unique sections of the estimate. And what he does is he's using this report to pull all of those parts out into a single report that he can then hand off to his project manager, so his project manager or his site supervisor knows exactly which pieces to follow up on and where they come into play. So this one is a very interesting one because, again, in that case, you could actually go through and set the unit type to be an allowance, or the item unit to be an allowance, and then you could use the item units report to just pull out those specific items without providing the lump sum values for some of the labor or anything like that might apply. So this becomes an easy way to kind of mix and match or hybridize while still getting those allowance costs out as an individual piece. Now there's some additional questions here, and in case you guys are wondering, we are now in the Q&A portion of the webinar itself. So we're going to go through and try to fill out some of the additional questions that are here. At this point, if you guys do have any additional questions or you're hoping to catch that one little trick or you guys find yourself spending a lot of time on one specific piece and you'd like to see if we have a trick for it, go ahead and send those in. We'd love to see that information coming in through the questions panel, and if they do come through, we'll try to cover them now, or again, we'll have this all recorded too, so you can always come back and watch this on YouTube later to refine this information as you work. Now, along those lines, the next question that I want to touch on here is regarding the permission to lock down sections of the estimate. Now, the question is permission to lock or unlock the estimate controlled by user-based permissions, or is it configurable? That's actually going to be an aspect on the estimate itself of the administrator user type. In ConstructionSuite, there's really two primary users at the moment. Those two primary user types are going to be basic users or administrators in ConstructionSuite. This locking mechanism tends to be one of the functions of the admin user type. Now, you'll find that comes into play a little bit more when you start to get into permissioning for ConstructionSuite, which then means corporate or developer and above. And as you work through this additional detail, again, keep that in mind. You set yourself up as an admin, set up the people who you don't want changing everything as general users, and things like this estimate lock and template modifications or report template editing, those are all going to be limited for any of those basic users or the standard users in ConstructionSuite, not to mix and match terms. But that just keeps us focusing on them on what they should work on. I would mention, though, that at this point you guys should definitely keep an eye out for some of the upcoming webinars that we're going to be doing, where we start talking about the new releases that we have coming out before the end of the year. ConstructionSuite 10 is on the radar right now, and that might actually have some new, really interesting user-specific features and functions in there too. Definitely keep an eye out for that announcement email that we send, because it's going to be amazing. Now, next on the list of questions, we are starting to scroll down too far. And that's too far up. Should probably delete some of these as we get them answered, but I don't want to. Next one, we've got a question about leads to estimates. Now, if you don't mind, I'm actually going to, Jordan, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about this for just a second, because I want to kind of go through those. What's the difference, first of all, between a lead and an opportunity? Because that's a question that comes up for me almost every day.
It is a question that it is kind of a common question. I think until we actually look at leads and opportunities inside of ConstructionSuite, I know that maybe I'm asking you to do a bit of double duty here, Ian, but can you actually pull back over to the main ConstructionSuite interface so that we can get a quick read or a quick visual on leads first? And then in a moment, we'll move over to opportunities. Leads inside of ConstructionSuite are people. They're a special type of contact that you are working with in some capacity to scope out a potential job or potential project. Inside of ConstructionSuite, that potential project would be an opportunity. So we don't have any opportunities yet. Hasn't quite translated over. But before we start answering any questions about, well, how does lead information transfer or translate over into an estimate, I think it really is a good point to make, or a good point of distinction, that a lead is a person and an opportunity is a potential project.
That's true.
So given that set of information.
Yeah. Now, moving on, the theory behind this, or our design for leads moving into eventually having an estimate included, it does start with the lead itself. And generally, when that lead starts to provide additional detail about the job that we're going to be working on, that's when you might right-click and create an opportunity from that lead. So a lead will end up with an opportunity. All leads have opportunities. Not all opportunities have leads, because some of them are repeat customers. But again, you want to have an opportunity. The opportunity is going to be the work itself. The estimate goes into that opportunity because it's trying to find the price of that work. So again, as you go through and you create this, you're going to put in a generic opportunity name. Hyatt Place of Auburn. Type of job for this one is going to be a commercial project, which applies the commercial workflow in our dimension set, as we talked about last Thursday. And again, as you kind of go through and work with some of the additional details, you're fleshing out the basic description for the project that we're going to be looking at or estimating out. Click OK. Now, once you get into the opportunity itself, again, the very first thing that we want you to do, obviously, is create an estimate for this project. This allows you to dive into the estimating wizard, which asks you which of your predefined templates we're going to be using for this job. There's an option here to start from scratch. Please don't ever use this one unless you're just building a brand new estimate. Generally, you guys want to use the predefined templates and set yourself up for success by building an estimate template that you can then build off of from there. But this is generally how it leads in. Lead becomes an opportunity. Opportunity has a space there for the estimate. Once the estimate is finished, that's when you can go through and generate a proposal, which is what you hand off to your customer at that point.
Yeah, and the proposal at that point is going to pull in a lot of the information that you entered all the way back when they were a lead. Well, now they're a client, or they're about to become one. Hopefully, if you've gotten to that point.
Absolutely. And as you work your way through that, again, the proposal is our response or our answer to what do we hand off to the customer. Mm-hmm. We make that distinction because, again, the estimate can be very detailed and it's spreadsheet-esque. So unless your customer is a bookkeeper or an engineer perhaps, or somebody who just loves numbers, the presentation for this is not going to be as quality as the presentation that you would get from a proposal, nor will it be as professional looking either. So again, focus on that, use those proposals, and there's options to make the proposal into a table, but you've got a little bit more flexibility on how you make that presentation. So definitely go through and review those as well as you work. Now there is a brief reminder here about that hide unused section feature. It's a switch. So you are either always hiding new things or you're never hiding new things. The comment here is about adding in new categories or subcategories. If you add in a new category or a new subcategory, by default it has no value, so it immediately hides, or shortly after you create it, it hides. Now this is a great indicator for me that we have a lot of tools and a lot of features and a lot of functions, but they don't all work at the same time for all of you. That option that I was referring to earlier was designed and built for people who have a complete estimate and they just need to put in the prices for the items for the estimate itself. The idea for that function, to hide unused sections, is that everything you need is here. You just need to hide all the things that you didn't need. The expectation is that you won't actually be adding new categories and subcategories because everything should be here and you should have the opportunity to go in and see it. Now this unfortunately is not always the case. There are always exceptions. So sometimes you may need to go back into the view menu if you're going to be adding a lot of things in there and turn off that feature, basically show unused sections so that we can add in those additional categories and subcategories. But the design was have everything you need in the template, fill in all the numbers, and then hide them when you're done. Hide all the unused sections when you're done. That was the intent for that tool. As a follow-up to this too, we've got a couple of questions about what else we can build into the estimate. One of the questions here seems to be referencing a past estimate or a past estimating webinar that we did where we talked about some earlier tricks. The question here is about specs being tied to the estimate itself. Now I love this question because referencing back to that last tips and tricks estimating webinar, what we talked about was opening up the category or subcategory notes section and using the general notes as a spec sheet. Now ConstructionSuite has built in a specification wizard that you can access, but it requires that you go through and build your specification set from scratch every time there's no connection to the estimate. This fixes that. What you can do with this is you can grab the specification that you guys want to use, that you would typically use for this category, apply that to the general notes section, do the same for all of your subcategories as well, and if you build your specs into the estimate, then the act of estimating also fulfills the act of building your spec sheet. Then, the report that you'll use in order to pull that specification sheet out is going to be available under Project Management, where you're using the List Notes report. And then include the general notes for there, and you guys will be able to work off of that to get a specification sheet that was created because you put in numbers. So it's a great way to kind of, I guess it's the concept of two birds, one stone.
Yeah, it takes the work that you've done and then multiplies it by a factor of 2 or 3. So, the amount of time you put in now pays so much in terms of dividends down the road.
Absolutely.
Because that doesn't just pull into the list notes report. If you were looking for a way to provide some of that information in a proposal, maybe you don't go into too much detail, but if you set up these notes beforehand, there are also options to pull notes into proposals as well.
Okay, going through some of the additional questions, and we've just got a few more minutes here, so we will try to apply some of the additional detail here as we can. And it looks like there's some follow-up questions on splitting up things like allowances, again, an allowance for the sink, labor for an install, material for the install. I assume this is like piping or attachments or anything like that. Probably the caulk or the seal for the sink itself. Would all of those go into the same subcategory? Typically for me, I would say no. And part of the reason for that, you'll find that throughout all of our estimating templates as well. If we go into plumbing systems, what you would typically find in a plumbing systems area is the one subcategory for my labor cost for the subcontract that I'm going to be using. I don't have in-house labor for plumbing, so that should actually be a subcontractor cost. That's typically going to be separated because that, when it gets over to QuickBooks, is going to show up as an item called plumbing labor. That item is going to connect to an account where I track all of my subcontractor fees, which means that it has to be separate from my material cost and from my allowances. Now my next section here might be, I've got water heaters. This should, at least in theory, probably be an allowance. Maybe we use the same ones. We could always leave this as an estimated cost because it's going to be materials and they just pick whichever one we have. I don't necessarily need them to choose, so that could stay as is. Maybe plumbing fixtures becomes an allowance, and it's all part of this lump sum cost. Again, the concept here is we're trying to keep like with like in the body of the estimate. Now, you don't have to do it this way. Of course, this is the reason we made this customizable is some of you may want to instead come in and say this one line is an allowance. So maybe we go search for the allowance item, like so, the unit, and we can apply that individually or en masse, of course, based on our settings. And then we could use the item units report to perform a similar function. But I prefer, especially when we're working with QuickBooks, to have all of my allowances grouped together under a section so that I know that that item showing up in QuickBooks is always allowances. I prefer to have all of my subcontractor fees separated out, again, so that we can have all the subcontractor fees set up. And again, all of this information I want to have structured in such a way that I can define a specific COGS account for every subcategory in the Estimate and Construction Suite, because then estimating also allows me to get the reports out of QuickBooks that I want when I go into and use the QuickBooks integration. Again, separate webinar. Hopefully you guys can join us for this one or take a look at our YouTube channel. We have a library of information about the QuickBooks integration, and we talk about these and more features and functions that I would love for you guys to go in and take a look at. Now, along those lines, there are still questions out there that I really, really want to answer, but unfortunately we've run out of time. So along those lines, guys, if you do have follow-up questions, if there's anything else that you would like to revisit with us, please don't hesitate to give us a call or shoot us an email. Or again, we've got a lot of this content showing up on our YouTube channel as well. You can find us on YouTube by going to youtube.com and searching for UDA Technologies, all one word. You'll find a library there of probably over 150 videos at this point. By the end of the year, I hope that it's much, much larger with all the new products that we plan on releasing. But again, take a look for us there, or again, via email or phone. You can always find our contact information back in the main Construction Suite interface. Let's close this estimate wizard. Just go up to the Help menu, take a look for the area to contact us. Contact us. That's another sign that I've talked too much, perhaps. So go to the contact information field and you will find phone numbers, you will find email addresses, and there's going to be different ways to reach us depending on where you guys are located in the world. So for example, in Australia, we might have a Skype number that you can call, or different email addresses, whatever it might be, as opposed to the people who are located here in the United States or possibly up in Canada, or maybe even some of our clients over in Europe or India. We've got a fair size growing now in Mumbai as well. So again, if you're interested, take a look, reach out to us anytime, and we'd love to have you. For now, though, we need to go produce this video. So we're going to go ahead and end the webinar at this point. Guys, don't forget to join us next week as we dive into some of the tips and tricks for scheduling and how to figure out where your guys are supposed to be as opposed to where they went when we didn't want them there. So we're going to fix that next week as we dive into scheduling tips and tricks. That's also going to start at 3 o'clock Central, so join us there. Otherwise, guys, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you joining us today, and I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon. Take care, everyone.